I grew up in a quiet, middle-class suburb, one of those neighborhoods where everyone mows their lawns on Sundays and waves when you drive by. We were a close-knit community, and honestly, nothing truly strange ever happened there. At least, that's what I believed. Until that one Halloween night. There was one road people rarely talked about, Elmway. It wasn't part of any of the newer housing developments. It sat a few blocks away from the main streets, overgrown with weeds, lined with tall, twisted oak trees that seemed to block out most of the sunlight during the day. Even when I was a kid, my mom used to say, "Don't go playing down Elmway. Those houses are all condemned." But as any 13-year-old would, that only made me more curious. That Halloween was supposed to be like any other. My friends, Tyler, Jordan, and Matt, and I had decided to go trick-or-treating one last time before we were too old. We planned to cover as many houses as possible, hit the neighborhoods with the best candy, and stay out late. It was around 10:30 when we decided to cut through Elmway to save time. Tyler had heard rumors that one of the old houses down there had been fixed up recently, supposedly for an older couple that had just moved in. We turned onto Elmway, and immediately the world felt quieter. No kids shouting, no laughter, no cars driving by. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. The streetlights didn't work, or maybe they'd burned out years ago. And then we saw it. At the very end of the street stood a house we all swore hadn't been there before. It was large, 2 stories tall, Victorian style, with chipped paint and windows so dark you couldn't see inside. A single pumpkin sat on the porch, its candle flickering faintly. A crooked sign on the gate read, "Trick or treat, ring for sweets." Tyler, of course, wanted to go up. Jordan said it was a bad idea. I was somewhere in the middle, terrified but curious. So, we went. The path leading to the door was cracked, lined with dead flowers. The air smelled faintly of metal, cold and damp, like rust or old blood. When Tyler rang the bell, the sound echoed inside the house much longer than it should have. We waited. Then the door opened. A woman stood there, tall, wearing a long black dress that brushed the floor. Her face was hidden behind a porcelain mask, smooth and pale, with painted red lips and black eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just held out a bowl of candy. Her hand was trembling slightly, but what caught my eye was how stiff her fingers were. Almost like they weren't bending right. The nails were dark, cracked, and too long.
Tyler said, thanks, and grabbed a few pieces. When she turned to me, she tilted her head just a little, like she was studying me, before placing a single piece of candy into my hand.
It was small, wrapped in shiny red paper with gold lettering that read, "Remember." Then she shut the door. The sound it made echoed down the street, deep and hollow. We laughed it off. I made a joke about her being extra spooky, and we moved on. But when I turned around, the house was completely dark. Every light, the pumpkin, the porch, gone. The next morning, Tyler texted me. He said he'd bike back to Elmway to see the house again, but it wasn't there. I didn't believe him, so I went myself. But when I got there, he was right. The entire lot was empty. No house. Just a patch of uneven dirt and an old for sale sign that looked like it had been there for years. The ground looked disturbed, though, like something had been there and then lifted away. When we asked around, no one knew anything. An older neighbor told us, "Kid, that place burned down back in the 80s. Killed the whole family inside. You boys better stay away from that end of the street." That night, I emptied my candy bag and started sorting through it. Everything looked normal, until I saw the red-wrapped candy. The word "Remember" was still printed across the front, but the wrapper was slightly torn. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt cold just looking at it. I left it on my desk and went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of my window creaking open. The air in my room felt colder than outside. When I looked at my desk, the candy was gone. I got up, thinking maybe it rolled off. But then, right on the floor beside my bed, I saw it again. the same red wrapper, neatly folded with something inside. I unwrapped it. It wasn't candy, it was a small curled photograph. The picture was old, faded, but I could make out a group of kids standing in front of a house. The same house, the one from Elmway. Only the kids looked wrong. Their faces were pale, their eyes black, and their mouths slightly open, as if caught mid-scream. And standing behind them was the woman in the mask. In the photo, she wasn't holding candy. She was holding a red ribbon, wrapped tightly around a child's wrist. I dropped the photo immediately and turned on the light. But when I looked down again, the photo was gone. In its place was a small piece of paper. Written in shaky, dark handwriting were the words, "See you next Halloween." That was 3 years ago. Since then, every October 31st, no matter where I move, no matter how far, I find a red candy wrapper on my windowsill when I wake up. Sometimes it's empty. Sometimes it isn't. And last year, there was a photo again. Only this time, it wasn't the kids. It was me. I never believed in haunted places. Not really. I always thought ghost stories were just ways for people to explain things they didn't understand. But what happened to me last October changed that. It started 1 week before Halloween. I was a second-year college student, overworked, exhausted, and behind on my assignments. The university I go to is one of those older campuses that's half beautiful and half falling apart. You know the kind, ivy-covered buildings with stone walls and pipes that rattle like something's crawling inside them. That night, the library was supposed to stay open till midnight, but when I got there, a sign on the door said, "Closed early for maintenance." I stood there frustrated, holding my laptop and coffee, wondering where else I could study. That's when I saw one of the janitors locking up nearby. He was older, probably in his 60s, wearing a faded uniform with a name tag that said, Earl. I asked him if there was anywhere quiet I could work for a few hours. He paused, looked at me longer than I expected, and then said,
"If you're desperate for quiet, there's an old classroom down in the science building basement. Nobody uses it anymore. Room B13. Just don't stay too late."
He said it casually, but there was something about the way he lingered on that last sentence that made me uneasy. Still, I needed to finish my paper, so I went. The science building was older than most of the others, built sometime in the 1950s, from what I'd heard. The kind of place that smells faintly of chemicals and old metal. When I opened the basement door, a cold draft hit me in the face. It smelled like rust and damp concrete. The stairwell light buzzed above me, that faint flickering yellow that makes everything look older than it is. I went down slowly, my footsteps echoing. The air felt thicker with every step, as if I was walking into a sealed space that hadn't been opened in years. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a single hallway lined with doors, most with their windows painted black from the inside. The sign for room B13 was crooked, hanging by one screw. When I pushed the door open, it resisted for a second before giving way with a low creak. The room looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Broken desks were pushed against the walls, old lab tables coated in dust, and in the center of the room stood a large chalkboard. At first glance, it looked blank, until my flashlight hit it. That's when I realized the board was covered in writing. Names, hundreds of them. Layered, scratched, erased, and written again. The strangest part was that some looked fresh, clean white chalk, no dust on top. I laughed to myself and muttered, "Creepy." Then I set my stuff on one of the few intact desks and started typing. About 20 minutes in, I heard a sound. It was faint, a low scrape like a chair leg dragging across the floor. I froze, took out my earbuds and listened. Nothing. I looked around. All the chairs were where they'd been. The only thing that had changed was the air. It felt heavier, colder. I told myself it was just the building settling. But then, a single piece of chalk rolled off the desk near the board and stopped at my shoe. I stared at it. My heart started pounding in my ears. Slowly, I looked up at the chalkboard. A new name had appeared. My name. I pushed my chair back, almost knocking it over. "Nope," I whispered, trying to laugh it off. I started packing my things, but the door wouldn't open. The knob turned, but it felt like someone was holding it from the other side. That's when the lights went out. For a few seconds, all I heard was my own breathing. Then, that scraping sound came again, louder this time. I turned on my phone flashlight, hands shaking. The beam of light swept across the room, broken tables, cracked tiles, dust swirling in the air. Then it stopped on the chalkboard. All the names were moving. I don't even know how to explain it. They were fading in and out, shifting like something was writing and erasing them at the same time. And then, across the middle, one line appeared in thick, white chalk. "You shouldn't have come back." I whispered, "What does that mean?" Even though no one was there. Something creaked behind me. I turned around, and in the far corner of the room there was someone standing there. It was a figure, tall, still, shadowed. At first I thought it was a mannequin. There were rumors about old experiments being stored down here. But then it moved, slowly, deliberately. It stepped forward once, and I heard that scraping sound again, not from the floor but from inside the walls. The smell hit next, metal and rot, thick enough to taste. I stumbled back against the desk, trying to get to the door again. My phone flashlight flickered, then went out completely. And in that darkness, I heard whispering. Not words I could understand, just low, wet sounds that crawled up my spine.
"You took my place."
The lights snapped back on. The room was empty. Everything looked normal again. Except for one thing. The chalkboard. The names were gone. Every single one. Except one. Mine. I didn't stop to question it. I ran. When I burst through the stairwell door, the janitor, Earl, was standing at the top of the stairs. He looked pale, shocked. He said, "You went down there?" I nodded, out of breath. He rubbed his forehead and muttered, "God damn it, I told them to lock that room for good."
When I asked what he meant, he said something I'll never forget. They sealed off that basement after what happened in 1989. A professor and his class never came back up. They found the chalkboard, covered in names, but no bodies. Since then, anyone who goes down there, their name shows up next. Then they vanish.
I tried to laugh, but my voice shook. "So you're saying I'm next?"
He didn't answer. He just said, "If your name's still there by morning, leave campus. Don't ever come back."
I didn't sleep that night. I went back the next morning. Stupid, I know. But I had to see for myself. When I opened the basement door, daylight barely reached the hallway. Room B13 was still there, door half open. I looked inside. The chalkboard was blank again. Completely clean. Relief washed over me, until I noticed something written faintly near the bottom corner, in fresh white chalk. Next class begins October 31st. Halloween came and went. I didn't go near campus. But 2 days later, one of my classmates, a girl who'd been looking for a quiet place to study, disappeared. The last place her phone pinged, the basement of the old science building, room B13. I used to work the night shift at a small local radio station. It wasn't glamorous, just an old building at the edge of town with one studio, one tower, and a coffee machine that hissed like a dying cat. Most of the time, I'd sit there alone, reading local news, playing requests, or filling the silence with late-night talk. Nothing strange ever happened, until last Halloween. That night, the sky outside was a dark orange haze, the kind that makes everything feel wrong before anything even starts. My shift began at midnight. The host before me, Carla, was packing up her things. She looked tired, more than usual. Before she left, she said something that stuck with me.
If you get a call from a man asking about the dead frequency, just hang up.
I laughed it off. Is that a Halloween prank? She didn't laugh. She just said, "You'll know what I mean if he calls," and walked out. The station was quiet after she left. The only sounds were the low hum of equipment and the static that sometimes crawled into the background. I started my first segment, reading the usual weather report, then transitioning into a few songs from the 80s. Everything was normal. Until the phone rang. The caller ID said, "Unknown." I pressed the line button. "WQBR radio, you're on air." There was no voice, just silence. I was about to hang up when I heard it, faint, distant breathing. "Hello?" I said again. Then a man's voice came through, distorted and low.
"You shouldn't be broadcasting on this frequency tonight.
I frowned. "Excuse me?"
It belongs to the dead."
And the line went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at the console. I thought maybe someone was pranking me. So I checked the logs. The call had no number, no trace, just unknown. A few minutes later, I noticed something stranger. The monitor that displayed my station frequency, 101.3 FM, had flickered. For just a second it read 101.6 FM. Then it switched back. Half an hour later, the phone rang again, same ID, unknown. This time I didn't answer it live. I picked it up privately. Before I could speak, the same voice said,
"Don't switch over. Don't let them in."
Then static filled the line so loud I had to pull the headset away. But beneath the static, I heard something else. Whispering. Hundreds of voices layered on top of each other like a crowd murmuring from far away. Some were crying, others laughing. Then one voice rose above the rest. A woman's voice, sharp and trembling.
"Help me, please. He's here."
The line cut off. I sat frozen. Every monitor light in the studio blinked once, all at the same time. The next song in the playlist started on its own, a track I hadn't queued titled "The Last Broadcast." I didn't remember adding it to the system, but the computer read it as a scheduled segment. When I played it, it wasn't music. It was the same whispering, louder this time, and this time, I could make out words.
"We remember you. You were on air when it happened. You never turned us off."
I shut the system down completely. But the audio didn't stop. It kept coming. Through my headset, through the speakers, even through the emergency broadcast system. And then, the red on-air light flickered, even though I hadn't pressed it. The station was live, but I wasn't talking. Someone else was. The voice on air was calm, slow, familiar. My own voice. It said,
"You're listening to the final transmission. Welcome back, listeners. We've missed you."
I ripped off the headset, unplugged the main power, and ran outside. The tower lights were still blinking, casting red over the parking lot. I looked up and saw something that made my stomach drop. The tower wasn't reflecting my broadcast anymore. It was pulsing, sending a signal out into total silence. And at its base, barely visible in the dark, were several figures standing in a circle, motionless, facing upward. I swear I saw wires or cables running from their heads to the base of the tower. I left everything, the station, my job, my equipment, and never went back. 3 weeks later, I got a message from Carla. It was short, just a single line. They moved the station to a new building. But the old one still broadcasts on 101.6 every Halloween night. I didn't answer. But last night, for the first time since then, I turned on my radio. The dial stopped on 101.6 FM, static at first. Then faintly, through the noise.
Welcome back, listener.
And that wraps up tonight's Halloween special, Real Horror Stories. The stories you've heard, The House That Only Appeared on Halloween, The Basement Classroom, and The Last Broadcast, were all drawn from real events told by those who lived through them. Some stories fade when the night ends. Others don't. They wait. They linger. And sometimes, they listen back. If you made it this far, thank you for spending Halloween night with us. Subscribe for more true horror stories every week. And if you've ever experienced something you can't explain, share it in the comments below. because the next story might be yours.